Hi, my dear friends. My name is Yoli O, and I am known as what is a qigong master, or a tai chi master, or a Taoist master, or a Chinese medicine master. I have become a monk in Wudang Mountains in 1999, and I have been living like a monk with monks and also on myself by myself since that time. And in this lecture, I'm going to talk a little bit about qigong and taijiquan and what is the foundation of that to help you if you are just starting with these kind of studies or you're just curious about what I have to tell to my students. My starting point for talking today is an observation that I made in at a conference, World Conference of Qigong in, I don't remember which year, but it was the second World Conference in San Francisco organized by Effie Chow. I have a clinic and I have classes online, and in this program that I offer, I use a lot of this kind of information. I read a lot of these kind of things, study Chinese, read things in German, French, English, so I'm also well versed in what they think in different kind of cultures, and that is very helpful. And as a result of that, I say usually things that you don't hear from other people talking about qigong or taijiquan and so on. I even say different things than what they say in China, and I have good reasons for that. Because of the Cultural Revolution, China changed. We can also be satisfied with what everybody says, but although I'm very much democratically inclined, I'm also an elitist. That means that it is important to investigate things until the bone and not be satisfied with what somebody important says or what everybody says, but to try to find out what things really mean. So I started translating things from Zhang Feng, the Taoist cloud cover, several other texts from the past and from the present also, on Chinese medicine and on Kung Fu and on well, a lot of different kind of things. And they usually say completely different kind of things than what we Westerners say. I would make myself easy as a translator if I would say what everybody else says, but it's just not what it says in the classics. So let's get on with this, and let me give you my introduction to what Qigong is all about and what it could do for you. During the lecture, you can either sit and listen, or you can practice with me. We're going to do a standing opening practice, very simple. If you feel dizzy or anything like that, you feel you lose consciousness, then just go sit. The practice is to learn to be concentrated on both the outer and the inner world at the same time in equal measure. We're starting with the standing in foot wide, so the feet are mixed together and our hands are on the dantian. When we are standing straight, we are standing in the vertical axis of our body from our heel to our crown. I will tell you more details about that in a moment. At the moment when you have a little bit of a sloped body, then by lifting with your attention the base of the skull up, through which you can open the crown, so not hanging on a thread, and then also at the same time behind the heart you can lift up the vertebrae, and then also at the kidney level you can lift up the vertebrae. A lot of amazing things happen that usually people try to fill up with artificial means. At the moment when you lift the skull, in a very basic principle, you hang the bones inside your muscles, and all the bones are hanging down from your intention. Same with the heart, the stone gate it's called, and also the water gate at Mingmen. Automatically, as a result of the weight, your hips fall into the right position, and you have to make sure you stand on your heels and not on your toes or on the middle of your foot. The Yongchen point, bubbling spring, is bubbling because it's open. When you're standing shoulder wide, the hands are standing in a Tai hand form. That is a closed hand form to create a sort of echo room, which is also called a cauldron, around the dantian. And then the civil dantian is in 3 fingers below the umbilicus in the vertical axis, and the Taoist one is behind the umbilicus. This line leads to a point behind the midline of the body that people usually perceive, and it is on the backside, almost in the spinal column. It's part of what is called the 4 kidneys.
When you measure 3 or 4 fingers from the front of your belly and you have a big belly, then automatically as a result of that you will miss the point, because then you confuse it easily with the center of gravity. And the center of gravity and the dantian, there are two different kind of things. At the moment when you're standing, you're continuously realigning your body because of the way how you shift your weight, and you want to develop a sense of pressure on the floor on your heels, and the counter pressure of that is the foundation for the development of jing, the coherence of your body. At the moment when you're standing, you keep your tongue to your palate to make sure that the dumai and the renmai are connected, and the steam from the dantian can go up through the dumai and can sink down to the renmai. Also the heart and the dantian and the lungs and the dantian, they have to harmonize to make sure that the body is functioning properly. So when standing, you pay attention to your channels, you pay attention to your organs, and you pay attention to your dantian and your posturing. That's a whole lot.
Hi dear friends, welcome. My name is Yoli O. That's my Taoist name. My Dutch name is René Goris, and I have been practicing qigong taijiquan since I was 11, and I am turning 60 this year. I have been practicing qigong at an early age together with yoga and meditation as part of a quest to improve my health. And in that process, I overcome the issues I was born with. And officially, I should have been dead 20 years ago. And that means that I think, anyway, that I survived my own diseases because of the practice of qigong and taijiquan. And I can do things that my doctor always told me I would never be able to do. So I'm very happy with my practice, and I want to also share with you in this talk what I learned over time, and I want to share with you some of my message in that sense. This movie is made in context of the World Qigong and Tai Chi Day for 2023. I have been studying this for a long time, but the time that I start professionally studying this is when I was about 24, 25, after I wanted to learn some form of self-defense because of being attacked by a bunch of cokeheads in Amsterdam where I was living, and nothing really attracted me very much. I always wanted to do martial arts, but because of my disease I was not allowed to do it. I was now living completely isolated from any medical support. So I decided to make my own decisions, and I ended up with taijiquan. So this is my origin story basically. And from there, one thing came to the next. I got invited at a certain point by an international university to graduate on the research of qigong. So I studied history of qigong in relationship to Chinese medicine, and also I graduated on the development of a healthcare program on the basis of Chinese medicine and qigong. Actually, it was originally intended to be introduced in countries in Africa because my mentor from the university, he was very much into creating support, healthcare for Africa, which is low cost and community building in structure. So this was my original assignment in which I started it, and that is nowadays called Daoland. I've never been able to introduce it in Africa because of all kinds of circumstances, so we can talk about it another time. It is not very relevant right now. I have been teaching anyway since about 35 years I think, and in 1999 I started moving to China and I became a Taoist monk in the Wudang Mountains, and I have been part of a Taoist community ever since that time. I have been working and studying in different areas, among others in Qingchen Mountain. I have been working and studying in Baiyangguan in Beijing, and also in monasteries and schools in Wuhan and Sichuan, what's it called, Chengdu, and all kind of other places, just to try to understand the role of Taoism in things like Qigong and meditation. I've been going to many different kind of places and teachers, and I am basically now sort of reporting on what I learned, and my general message is not in agreement with what you normally hear in workshops. And I know I have to tread lightly, carefully also, to make sure that I don't upset people, because I don't want to make enemies out of people. I just try to report honestly about what I've been learning and how we seem to be on a sort of blind spot with our development of qigong because of language change in the West. I'm not going to go too deep on that. If you follow my classes, you will eventually get to that point. But you will not hear me use the word energy, for instance, because there's no word for that in Chinese culture. And you can say whatever you want, but it is something that we created as a word, as a concept, and it is not always clear what it actually means. And certainly in the context of Chinese medicine, Taoism, it doesn't really have a function. And you will get to understand a little bit later what I mean with that. I also will share a few basic practices with that, and I want to say that if you watch this movie as part of the World Tai Chi Day, the VIP customers, they also get free access to the Qigong primer that I wrote, and there's talk in there about Neidan, and there's talk in there about Zhongwu Qigong. That is my main Qigong style that I teach. It's a Taoist style of Qigong, which helps you to develop Jing first, and later on also help you develop your place in the Taoist cosmology, and from where ritualization, meditation, Taoist magical work, I Ching studies, and so on, all originate. So I emphasize also the study of I Ching in the work that I do very much. And also in my own translation, I came up with something completely different, because I started translating from what my teachers told me and not so much about what other translators have been doing before, because most of these translators have never really studied the I Ching from the perspective of Taoist or Confucian culture. So without further ado, to stop basically with introducing, I have 30 minutes. I want to show you some things and I want to talk about some things. So I think I will be busy for about 15 minutes talking, and then the rest is going to be exercise.
Are you still here, standing and practicing? Make sure you're not getting dizzy or feel weak in your legs. This is a long practice for many people. Make sure you're standing in the way Wang Chongyang, the founder of this exercise, actually suggested you have to stand straight, and it has to feel as if you're almost falling backwards. So you have to find your balance on that. Don't lock your knees, don't lock your spinal column, let everything stand loose. Also at the same time, keep your eyes open and make sure that your consciousness going outward and going inward is developing in the same rate, so that you continuously stay aware of whatever is happening, the shun.
My starting point for talking today is an observation that I made at a conference, World Conference of Qigong in, I don't remember which year, but it was the second World Conference in San Francisco, organized by Effie Chow. In that conference, I noticed there are three kinds of practitioners, and these are ethnically divided. And there was a sort of unspoken hierarchy in there where you could see some discrepancies that I could not explain on a rational way. First of all, the lowest tier were the Western teachers that were subservient to the Chinese teachers, American and European Chinese teachers, and then there were the Chinese mainland teachers that were present there, and they were very dominating towards the mainland Chinese, the European Chinese and the American Chinese, because they saw them as only half real Chinese, so they were not considered real Chinese. When I moved to China in 1999, and later on, a few years later, when I was studying in Bayangguan, I noticed that the Taoist monks, one of the things that happened to them is that they were frequently opened up to the teachings of different Qigong and medicine teachers from different areas of China, and I could very often see them raise an eyebrow to understand. I can't do it by myself with one eyebrow, but I saw them raise an eyebrow because they learned other things within Taoism than what these people think, and this what is in Taoism called usually heterodox teaching. That these are people who are teaching particular kind of things which fall outside of the historical context of things, and for Taoists, historical context is very important. Of course, in the West, we have our own ideas about what Taoism is, but they are in conflict with what Taoists themselves think. So it is just a matter of guessing who then is right and who then is wrong. I'm not going to say anything about that. That's with a lot of things like that. One of my Taoist friends said that one of the problems in China is the commercialization of qigong. And as a result of that, because of these commercialization processes, people can make a lot of money being a qigong teacher, and the making of money becomes more important than anything else. Of course, taijiquan and qigong, they're also part of the nationalist movement in China. And that is for us Westerners sometimes confusing, because that means that there is this sort of a barrier where people do not accept that we as Westerners can understand things, so they also don't explain all the things that are really very relevant for that epistemic climate of China. And we have something similar, of course, going on in the West. We have also an epistemic climate which doesn't allow everything to just be known as they are, but we also color our own history. So summarizing, we can say there are a few things that we as learners of qigong have to come to grips with and to understand. And the first one of that is language. You can't understand something without having a language for it. You can say like, but I have an intuitive feel for what it is, but this intuitive feel is always showing you that you are right, and that means that you are convincing yourself by the feelings that you have. You have to understand that when you practice qigong within the Taoist view, you are professing science, and that means that you have to have a skeptic idea about what is true and what is not true. And one of the main things of criticism that Taoists have is that if we don't understand our language, then what do we actually say? And that is something that they took from Confucianism. In Wudang Taoism especially, they emphasize that if you don't understand Confucius, how can you understand Taoism? Confucius is very famous for saying that a word is a word, and if you don't understand the meaning of the word, then you don't understand the consequences of that word. So then you get confusion and things start drifting, what in anthropology we call cultural drift. Cultural drift is interesting. Science works by the grace of cultural drift, Western science anyway, because every generation has to reinvent science, and they have to therefore reinvent the language and the concepts and so on, because otherwise they won't have work. If we know everything there is to know, there is no progress. So that is a very important part. And within Confucianism and also in Taoism, they basically say, if we know what something means and we can agree about that, why would we change that? And because at the moment when we change that, we create confusion, and confusion leads to disease. So don't change things. That's a very important part. The main part of qigong training is to help clarify things and to take away confusion. And that brings us already to something completely different than what very often is being professed in our modern society, both in China and in the West. The second aspect of qigong that is very important is to have a theoretical concept. And theoretical concept is based on history. That means that you don't have a theory without a language, because language provides the word for that theory, but also you have to have a root in history. And if you don't have a root in history, then whatever you say is basically unprovable. What they did as Taoists in the past is they let people practice and exercise to be able to prove things for what they are. And of course, in your exercise, there are a lot of different kind of things you can feel. Every scientific model provides you with a particular kind of experience of reality, and they also provided a theoretical framework to help you understand what you needed to feel. So the theory is like a guidepost to bring you to a particular kind of thing. And even though exercise is the main thing to get there, still you need that theoretical framework. And of course, for Taoism, the theoretical framework is the yin-yang theory as a foundation. All the other theories, they originate from that. Yes, you can say there's Tao and so on, but that's another thing. So when you look at things from that perspective, you can say, okay, so I need to understand myself through my experience, but I have to challenge my experiences on the basis of the yin-yang theory. What you see people do nowadays in modern time is try to explain everything on the basis of biological theory and chemistry and so on and so on. And these kind of things, they are not required for qigong practice, because qigong as an art from the past, from the historical perspective, is based on other things. And you see that the word qigong is part of what in Chinese culture is called tiu. Tiu is basically meaning sports. Right, so for the Chinese government, qigong was part of tiu. That means that it's emphasized. In other branches, they also call it sometimes dance related. So they emphasize then the dance aspect, and sometimes dance and sports, they're also related with each other, or they're integrated with each other. You see this also in the West, where they see dancing as a form of fitness training. Nothing wrong with that in itself, but we're trying to talk about qigong, of course. And at the moment, when you look at the word qigong, it is also a relatively new invention. It is a reimagination of different kind of practices, and as a result of that, it also got reconceptualized in something that was considered more valuable for the cultural doctrine of that time. The original roots of these practices, they are meditations, they are movement practices, they are all kind of things imitating professions, animals, natural phenomena, and so on. And these are supposed to become manifested through your body, like a sort of shape-shifting, you can say. So in a way, you can say that the origin of qigong is in shape-shifting. That means that we try to become something else than what we actually are. And the concept of there, the basic concept of there, what we learned from history, this is Jing. Jing is being proposed in a variety of Taoist classics as being the way how we construct and compose our body, and how we gradually become something which is more perfect than what we are. And then we talk about three different concepts which are important within the context of theory also. That is namely the development of ideas of awareness and of coherence of the body, and what we normally call also our functionality. In essence, what we say is that we need awareness first. We need to be aware and alert on what is going on in our body. And this aspect is a very important aspect for qigong, because that is the concept of shun. And the concept of shun belongs to three concepts, Jing, Qi, Shun, which are all very important. The second concept is Jing. So at the moment when we talk about Shun on the one hand and Jing on the other hand, we talk about the awareness, and then the awareness of the body, of course, and then how the body is being constructed. And that being constructed of the body parts, that is where the Jing comes from. Yes, of course, there's also the potential for the body, but it is also to a large degree a filling in of concept of Western biology into qigong practice, and that is not necessarily correct. Even though it is valuable at times, it is not necessarily correct. Then at the moment when you look at these things, you can say, okay, when the awareness is able to guide the way how we comport our body, then gradually our body becomes better and better. And in Chinese medicine in general, you can say from Huang Ni Jing and other classics that if the body is perfect, then at that moment automatically we will be considered healthy, and healthy means we're not dying. Yes, and for most people, after we are about 50 years old, we start dying.
Let's get back to our exercise for a moment. What we exercise for is to develop the durability of our body. Our body, of course, is the representation of our self, our health, our body. These are for Taoist medicine the same. So at the moment when we are practicing these kind of exercises, we're looking for the ultimate solution for human suffering. This is basically what we exercise for, and that is called healing.
What I mean with saying that from 15 you are starting to die, I have to explain a little bit more with a little bit deep theory. The thing is that aging, according to ancient theory, is caused by our cells letting go in our feelings, in our desires, in our passions, and so on. as a result that we become less aware of things, and accidents happen to us. And accidents, they are not just the fact that we drop from a stairs, or that we are bumping into a door from a cupboard that is open, but also means that we catch up with diseases and parasites and so on, things that we should normally be aware of and should avoid getting in touch with. So a large part of exercise is undoing the damage resulting from our ignorant actions. This is where we become hyper-Taoist, and you understand that when you practice qigong, you do something that belongs to a hyper-conservative idea about reality. Although I am very much aware as a Westerner how we in the West, we do this as part of our progressive nature, while in fact the history and the practice of qigong is hyper-conservative. So that is a dilemma that we face at the moment when we practice this. Now the thing is that there is a division, according to Tao Hongjing, a very famous Taoist doctor, of dividing people into three classes, namely the class of the sick, the class of the sub-healthy, and the class of the very healthy, the super healthy. And the super healthy, this is the pseudo-immortals. So you can say there's the immortals on top, and there's the gods on top of that. So we have to grow, depending on where we are, in all these categories, and our Shen actually grows with that. So at the moment when we get to this level, our Shen is actually God. Yes, here it is divine, and here it is consciousness. Here it might be suffering, or slightly suffering, but here it is really deep suffering. So you see that the Shen is shifting in meaning, and the meaning here is called the Kuai, which is also seen as devil. And it means that somebody who is very sick, at that moment his consciousness is based on self-preservation, if you will put it in modern terms, right? So when we practice qigong, we have to grow from self-preservation all the way to doing service to the world. So this is basically the tasks that we have in life, and this is the progression of a different kind of a Shen. They're all the same character, they're all the same concept. And Kuai, although it is called different, together Kuai Shen, this is the whole range between we grow. So when we are born as a Kuai, because we are very helpless, and we continuously have to blackmail our environment, and by the time that we are 15, we are supposed to be sub-healthy, and that means that we are not completely independent, but we are growing in a particular kind of way. And that means that qigong practice from an ancient perspective is a means to help us become really grown-ups. If we forget about that part, then at that moment from 15 onward we start freezing in our habits, and gradually we start doing all the things that society thinks we need to feel comfortable about, all kind of things, like making a lot of money, eating nice things, drinking drugs, trying to sedate us so that we don't feel our suffering, and so forth and so forth. Yeah, so the whole agenda of qigong in that sense is the most important part of qigong, and the second part of that is the theoretical framework through which it tries to realize that. So practicing qigong without studying I Ching and without studying Taoist history and so on is usually considered offbeat, and this you're experimenting, and it is like what it says in the I Ching, you go into the forest without a forester, so of course you get lost. And that doesn't mean that you don't feel good with it, it feels really very great. But from the medical perspective, it is said that if you feel anything inside your body, that means you're not doing very good. So if you feel the energy of your body, that is usually not considered a good sign. When you are practicing properly, you are supposed to not feel anything, because qi is a signal of functionality, and if your functionality is perfect, there is not going to be any sensation. So there is no really reason to worry, and there's no reason to feel anything. Same when our body is comported properly, that means the Jing is comported properly, then at that moment we are not having any space for problems. So they can't settle inside us, we become impervious to all kind of problems. So that is the second part. And the Shen, of course, is when our awareness is perfect, and then at that moment we are immediately aware that something is going wrong, and we immediately correct ourselves. So this is basically it. Then a fourth part, which is very important, that is the study of Ling. And that is where we start studying to make the transition from Shen as being super healthy to become an immortal, because the Shen makes us aware of the Ling makes us aware of our interaction with the universe at large. And this is a very important aspect of training. And this is something that is usually skipped by saying, well, the Ling is about the supernatural. And because of the change in language, the change of use of characters, also the original meaning is a little bit hidden, because Ling actually is about the communication between you and the universe and other people. And that is also the work that you do to stay in that communication and to develop that communication. So in that sense, you can say, okay, when you start doing Ling body work, that means that you start using your body as an integration tool for this Ling. You start preparing yourself for immortal life, and then you learn to do out-of-body experiences, communication with gods and spirits and so on. And then you start also understanding a little bit more about the concepts of Chinese medicine. And that is the whole point. And so, for instance, my students, they have to go through this whole program where they learn Jing Qi Shen. They have to learn all the anatomy and physiology of Taoist medicine, Yin Yang theory, study I Ching intensively, so that they can learn to think Yin Yang theory. Of course, that includes also Wu Xing and all the 12 other theories that are relevant. But most important is that they learn to integrate their awareness with this Ling thing. And Ling is basically the holist integration of all things together. You could call them the how do you call this? The Force in Star Wars. Ling is that what is differentiated in the world so much that it contains reference to everything else in the universe, and that shows sort of a feedback. You can say the future dictates the past, in the sense that it enriches you because of that training, and you start anticipating what you could become. So that means you have returned to your origin, and you can grow further as a spiritual being, so to say. This is the difficult part, because all these things, they take time. When we have all kind of sensations, what Taoism says, we are practicing, we feel immediately something. That is usually the pains of our body that we feel. This is the troubled nature of our earthly existence, and our body is usually called a collection of dirt bags as a result of that. So our natural sufferings, this is the reason why we feel all kind of things. So as a Taoist, the main message from a lecture like this is that we have to learn to not suffer by reducing the impact that things have on our body, so that we don't feel all kind of things, and we can feel comfortable and pleasant without actually being rich or having things or having desires, wanting to hold on to things and so on. Even our practices have become integrated with our life in such a way that everything becomes practice. So you are busy 24 hours a day practicing to become an immortal. There is only a continuous concentration in life, and there is no allowance for yourself to degrade into the pleasures of life that most people seek for. And this is no different from what they do in Buddhism or Hinduism and so on. To achieve a high level of enlightenment, immortality and so on, it requires you intense practice, but also to develop the level of medicine that is required, according to the Huangdi Jing, for the dedicated, serious practitioner, is that you have to learn these things to have an intimate relationship with yourself, so that you can understand what everybody goes through, and then you can create a pathway not only to help people alleviate their suffering from diseases, but also to get onto the path of immortality. So I hope this lecture was very interesting to you. I have larded it with some exercises, and when you have been doing these exercises to practice this while I'm talking, then that would have been really very great, because at the moment when you listen to this and you're at the same time practicing, you actually fulfill the goal of training, namely learning. And that is the main thing of qigong practice. Every moment has to be experienced as a new moment. So at the moment when you are practicing, that is basically the meaning of the now, is that you have to experience things as if they happened for the first time, but you should never forget your past and you should never forget your future. So you have to continuously work according to plan. And there is no such thing as spontaneity where things just happen as they happen, because that's your desire trying to escape from responsibility. No, it is like the spontaneity is that the things happen exactly as they should happen. That means with your future and your past in consideration.
Now that we end our practice for today, go stand with your feet back together and return to your origin. Your hands Laogong on dantian. Press slowly inward with a little bit of force, elbows a little bit out, to secure the yang into the center.
When you feel this is an interesting material, then don't hesitate. Sign up for my courses, of course. I hope you have a lot of fun with all the other speakers in these practices and that you pick up a lot of different kind of things. I am not here necessarily to sell my stuff. I'm a very serious teacher and I don't joke around. I make a lot of jokes though, but that's another thing. Have a very nice day.